Sherry and I are really happy that you're here with us this morning to hear Dr. Karen Haigh present an overview of the Reggio Emilia approach and philosophy of teaching and learning.
The reason why the Reggio Emilia approach appeals to us so much is the image of the child as a capable doer and thinker, and the many ways that they are able to communicate the things that they know. And so also the relationships and the community building. So there's so many aspects of this that align with Shorecrest and who we hope these children will be as they grow through the years. And with our approach to teaching and learning, experiential and the lower schools. So we connected with Karen, and she's been working with the Alpha Junior Kindergarten and first grade teachers. And we've been focusing on documentation of student work, so how they're, observing the children while they are playing and engaged in investigations, and they're collecting, photographs, their children's words, videotapes of them, artifacts of things that they make, and then we come together with Karen once a month and look at samples of all those things. And the teachers reflect with Karen and myself, and we go through a whole process of seeing what the children's needs are and their interests are, because really, motivation theory will tell you that when children are interested, the things that, we're validating their opinions and feelings and interests, when they're learning through their interests, they're so motivated, right? So it's meaningful to them, it's authentic. So she's helping us through this process of really examining their works to see where we need to go next with them. And it's been a wonderful process so far, and we hope to continue on next year and for a while with her. But thank you so much for coming to speak to our parents, because you are really our partners in our children's education. Your children that you're sharing with us. So we're thankful that you're taking the time to learn more about this approach, and hopefully you'll have some questions for Karen.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So this approach, I'm gonna show you some slides from Italy, and it originated in Italy. And a lot of times we talk about being Reggio inspired, because the only place where they really can do this full approach is where they ended up in this community. So a lot of programs in the United States are influenced, inspired by this approach, but it can take on many different shapes in terms of how they adapt it and how they approach it. I guess the biggest thing I want to say too, though, is this is not an approach. I remember one time I did a presentation about this approach for a principal in Chicago, in a public school. And after I did the presentation, she said, "How much does the package cost?" And I said, "There is no package. This is not a product that you buy. This is something that you construct over time. You've been working with children, working with parents, working with teachers, working with administrators. And so it's not like you go to a workshop and all of a sudden you fully understand this. It takes years and years to kind of build and construct it over time. They've been exploring this approach, and they still say it's a project in Reggio. It's an ongoing project since right after World War II. That's when they really began to focus on this approach. So I'm going to say a little bit about the history and the foundations of the approach, and then show you some slides. Okay? So talk about the origins of the Reggio Emilia approach, some of the elements, applications, showing some images, and then some of the guiding principles. So it originated it's in a city in northern Italy. And I guess I want to clarify too, some people assume that all of Italy is using this approach. They're not. There's a tendency in northern Italy for them to be a little bit more progressive. And this particular city has its own childcare system. And then it developed its own philosophy. And then it used it. And people from all over the world come and visit. They usually have about, I want to say maybe 20 tours a year. And sometimes they would have 200, 400 people coming and looking. And I first went in 1991, and I was in a classroom about this size with 30 people. So it's really become well known throughout the world. They also, it started, this area of Italy was devastated after World War II. I mean, everything was devastated. And they wanted to do something to build a sense of hope after being devastated in the war for so many years. So they decided they had some possibilities to do something, so they decided to build their own children's, child care center for the first time. And so it began with them developing their own child care system, and then in the 60s they developed this philosophy. Also, the philosophy of the curriculum approach was founded by Loris Malaguzzi, who was the founder of this approach. He passed away in the mid-90s, but he was a teacher who came to see what they were building when they started building their first center. So he was very involved from the very beginning. Also, I want to say too, in northern Italy, there was a strong kind of union movement, and women had a lot of say, so they were demanding childcare as they entered the workforce. So there was this need for childcare also that influences this approach and this program, or project, I should say. So it's based on 3 key ideas. I mean, there's many ideas, but these are key ideas I wanted to share. The children have the right to be taken seriously and believed in. Children have rights, not needs. And there's more of a focus on children's potentials rather than deficits. And we have a tendency, I mean, I think we're so used to it that we don't even pay attention, that we're always looking for what children can't do yet. And how can we fix that? We don't capitalize that much on what they can do and build on that. And this approach does. And so you're going to see some things that are kind of different than what we're used to in our education system in the United States. This idea too that children have rights, not needs. They don't refer to children who are, let's say, atypical as special needs children. They call them special rights children. So it's, again, and some of these words just cause you to kind of think a little bit differently in terms of your attitude or your approach to the idea. It's influenced by various educators and theorists. And they also, I mean, they're constantly doing research, but their kind of research is kind of different than the research we're used to. They're actually looking at what children are doing and writing down their words and looking at it and analyzing it. They're not looking so much at test scores. Okay, so they use really qualitative information rather than quantitative information a lot of times. But even though it's an Italian approach, it's very influenced by John Dewey. And John Dewey started at the University of Chicago Lab School and worked there for 12 years in Chicago, and then worked in various other places in the United States, and is very well known as a progressive educator in the United States. And so they don't just kind of look at, their ideas. They're always looking at lots of people's different ideas in terms of their approach. In looking at this, so they developed this kind of childcare system, but then they wanted to go beyond and create a higher quality program, going beyond having just mediocre programs. And so they wanted to go beyond that. And sometimes too, I think we in our education system need to look at that too. Because sometimes when you look at programs, and right now I'm talking more maybe in terms of childcare programs or preschool programs, and I know public schools have lots of issues. But sometimes we kind of settle for the average, and this idea was, let's go beyond the average. Let's go beyond the regular stuff and do something that's beyond that. So they thought that educators needed to recognize that each child was the protagonist of his or her learning. So another way of thinking about it, Paulo Freire would say, is the child is more the subject of learning rather than the object. Educators learn from children and events and families, so educators are always learning. They're not finished. It's not like, once you do your training, you're done. There's always ongoing learning, and educators are seen as researchers and always looking at this learning process that is so complicated. And educators are to be open to changing a point of view and not to be full of certainty. What do you think about that last one? Educators are to be open to changing a point of view and not to be full of certainty. Is there any reaction we have to that quote?
very different than it's historically been in the United States.
Yeah, aren't educators supposed to be certain about what they're doing? You know, so that's a very different way of kind of looking at things. And it's not saying that educators don't have knowledge about children and learning. It's that they're open to new possibilities, to new ideas. This is hard to tell, but this is their first building that they built. And it just kind of looks like a house. And what a group of parents and people from the community did is on Saturdays and Sundays for, I think it was a year or two, they just worked on building this building, and this was their first set. And it still exists today. It's a 3-classroom preschool program that they have. This idea of an image of the child as rich with ideas, wanting to learn, wanting to socialize, wanting to try to understand the world and how they fit into it. The children are born that way. And when we say children, we mean all children. So a lot of times people say, yes, but what about special needs children? Well, everyone is wanting to figure out how they fit in the world, and everyone has potential to fit. This idea of 3 subjects of education, children, teachers, and parents. That everyone's a learner. The role of parents and family, that parents and families are partners in the learning process. The role of space involved, you want a space that's, you know, sometimes people will go into these classrooms and say, oh, they're so beautiful, and it's all about feng shui and making something beautiful. It's really beyond that. It's about how to make this environment beautiful, engaging, but challenging, interesting, an environment that will encourage you to problem solve, to connect with others, to relate with others. The value of relationships and interactions, the idea of children working in small groups. A lot of their work is done either in small groups. It's not so much, there's a tendency here to either do individual work or whole group work, everyone working together at once. There, they do a lot of small group work. It's this idea that children are exchanging and engaged with each other and hearing other perspectives, and when it's a whole big group, it's too hard to sit and listen to everybody's ideas. But when it's a smaller group, you can. This idea. The role of time and the importance of continuity. One of the things that they do is they also loop with the children. So they have, they have infant toddler centers with children birth to 3. And then they have preschool centers with children 4 to 6. And kindergarten is part of their preschool program, and that's pretty typical in Europe and in other countries. So when they start, and they start usually around 6 months because they have much longer family leave act, you know, in Italy and some places in Europe. So the children start about 6 months, but they start and they stay with the same teachers in the same group of children. They may change classrooms or change rooms, but they stay with the same group until they're 3. And then when they start, when they're 4 in the preschool program, they'll be with the same group of children and the same teachers. They may move up to the 5-year-old room, but it will be with the same people. So in terms of relationships, children are, you know, some people have a hard time with this, but children are not having to deal with kind of separation or getting used to the school or getting used to people. And that means that they're really comfortable, they're ready to learn. So they have that kind of continuity. The interdependence of cooperation and organization. The other thing that's interesting about the school too is you might go into school and their classrooms are big. They have like 25 children, preschool children in the classroom. And here people say, oh, that's out of compliance, you know, that's too many children. But they also have an artista, which is a person who has a background in some kind of the arts, and they help in the school. And they have a special classroom called the atelier, we call it in America a studio, where children go and work with small groups, and they have a really wide range of materials, and they can really concentrate and focus. So sometimes when you go to school, some kids might be in the studio. They also have kids helping in the kitchen. So you might see 2 or 3 kids helping in the kitchen. And they see, like, when you see the maintenance worker or the food aide, everyone sees their role as helping children and being involved with children in school. It's almost like a home-like atmosphere. And here it's a little bit more like a silo effect. The maintenance people do this, the kitchen people do this. Everyone kind of does their job separately, but they're more together in terms of how they do it. Teachers and children are partners in learning. So while children are learning, so are teachers. They may be, a lot of times they're working on projects or special studies. The teachers may be learning about the topic, but a lot of times the teachers are focusing more on the children and how they're learning. Because what we know is all children don't learn exactly the same. Sometimes we treat education like everyone learns exactly the same time, but they really don't. And so they're trying to look at the different strategies children are using to learn. Keep that in mind. The other big one is the many languages of children. In terms of this approach, they use a variety of materials and languages. And when I say languages, it could be the language of gesture, facial expression, it could be the language of clay, the language of photography, the language of wire, paper, blocks. All kinds of ways that children are using communication to express their ideas, but also to build an understanding of their ideas. So they have a huge range of materials, and sometimes when people will see some of the work that some of the children do there, they'll think, oh, these kids are really advanced. But we have to keep in mind, since they're about 10 months old, they've been using these amazing materials that they've been exposed to. So it's not that they're exceptional, it's just that they've had a lot of experience with these materials where other children haven't had that. The power of documentation. They use documentation to kind of record children's ideas, what children say, what children do, what children make. And they look at that documentation, and it really is the generator for learning. Because how they develop curriculum, again, they don't have a packaged curriculum of how they're going to, do the whole year. They carefully look at what children are doing, what children are saying, what children are making, and try to get a sense of what are some of the motivations, what are some of the interests, and then they build on that and try to expand that. It's a quite complicated process, and it takes a long time to learn because we don't learn that way in terms of how to develop curriculum. And a lot of teacher education programs, they don't do that. They really do use kind of a package system or have some kind of more of a recipe in terms of this kind of approach. So you really have to look at it, and when you're looking at their work, you're trying to really find out what are their motivations, what are their interests, what are they trying to pursue, and how can we build and expand on that. So it's a quite complex process, but it's when you kind of get the flow of it, it's really, really interesting. And that leads into projects. A lot of times they'll do sometimes short-term or long-term projects where they'll study something together, where they're challenged and asked questions, or they're given opportunities to pursue something. So it's not like it's this free-for-all where the children are just playing and we're just watching what they're doing. They're carefully watching and then setting up the environment, setting up questions, setting up experiences or explorations that relate to what they're interested in. But they go over a long period of time. They don't stop after a week. Sometimes they go on for months because they keep extending and extending and extending. So they really are involved in very deep learning. Projects relate to this idea of flexible planning. I remember one time I was talking to a teacher who'd been teaching in Reggio for like 30 years, and she was over here and she was presenting, and she'd always say, oh, Reggio, we don't plan. And finally I said to her one time, I can't believe you say that, because they have like 6 hours of professional development a week in terms of looking at documentation and planning what they're going to do. So I was saying, how come you say you don't plan? And she said, we don't plan, we organize. And I said, so what's the difference? And she said, well, we organize the situation, but it's up to the child in terms of what is accomplished. And when you think about a plan, you're thinking about something that you want to accomplish, right? But they organize and set it up, and it's up to the child to see what they want to accomplish and what they do with it, because they're the protagonists of the learning. So it's a very kind of different way of looking at the learning process. And then ongoing professional development. They do a lot of professional development. And when I say professional development, it's not just having speakers come in or have somebody come in and explain, a curriculum to you. It's ongoing. It's all year. So to think about the fact that the teachers have 6 hours a week where they look at children's work, or maybe meeting with other teachers, maybe organizing documentation, because also I didn't mention in the documentation, they also present it up in the schools. They also use documentation for advocacy, so they'll make books or they'll make things to hand out to people, because they're always trying to promote this program in their city, so the city will support the schools and the philosophy. So these are 2 examples. To the left are 2 toddlers, and you can see kind of in terms of the complexity of their learning. So the 2 toddlers, the first is that they're learning together. So this idea that you're always learning with somebody, not just alone. It's better to hear other people's ideas and not just your own all the time. And so they've got a mirrored tile that they're looking at, but also there's a turtle on top of it. So this idea of being with somebody, this idea of having a tile just on the floor to make it a little bit more interesting, and then a turtle. Again, so keeping complexity in terms of the learning process. To the right is just an example of a child, that's a child actually from Chicago, using wire cutters for the first time. And I think that's about a 4-year-old little girl. These are other examples of their environments. They tend to have little piazzas in their centers, and the piazzas are seen as places for children to learn too. So a lot of times in a certain part of the day, they'll open up the piazzas and they have, dress-up areas or pretend store. They'll have places for children to play. This is looking at the piazza and then looking at a little garden outside through. They have a lot of natural light coming through in terms of their spaces too, which is, you can see to the right. That is a 2-year-old classroom. And in some ways it's very simple too, because sometimes people think, oh, it must cost a lot, but they use a lot of practical stuff. You can see they have pillows, they have a mattress, some cushions, which, for young children, they love sitting on that, playing with that kind of stuff. But also, you can tell they really know children. It's hard for me to, maybe this will work. Is it working? Oh no, it isn't working. It's trying to show that right here, they've got a set of stairs right here and a ramp, okay? Well, for 2-year-olds, a set of stairs and a ramp, if you remember 2-year-olds, they love that kind of stuff. They also did a study, they took 2-year-olds out into the city because they tend to choose 1 or 2 focus areas for the whole year, but they evolve in very different ways. And they were focusing in on the city of Reggio Emilia. So they took 2-year-olds out to watch to see what they did in the city. Well, what they loved doing was jumping off the stairs. They walked up by a church and they just kept jumping off the stairs. So they ended up studying jumping with 2-year-olds, which is, so it's really focusing on what kids are really doing and interested in. A lot of times they're really strong in terms of communication. They don't talk about literacy development as much as they talk about communication and how important that is. And so they have windows between classrooms, which is really interesting because you can connect with the other. But then also, they create talking tubes so you can talk between classrooms. And again, that isn't real expensive materials. Actually, some of those materials you get at stores where you get car parts. This is a dress-up area in the piazza in the central area. So again, all these ways for children to kind of play, create, imagine. They're very big on mixing kind of imagination and reality. Because for us, we always want to know the difference, but young children, they mix the two. And imagination is really some of the deeper ways they learn, because they can kind of go beyond what they know. Another material or a language exploring with paper. To the right are children dancing with large sheets of paper. To the left, a child measuring the length of the hallway using a roll of toilet paper. Another language that they use, light and shadow. To the left, they tend to have light tables, and these 2 girls are using watercolors and seeing how the light transfers through the paper of their work. And to the right, children are projecting great images in the block area to help support their imagination. This is in a studio, an atelier. This is a water system that a group of children developed, and then after they developed the water system, they kept it up in there, and they can come in there and use it as they come into the studio. Again, I guess I want to stress, this isn't something that they built in a day. This was something that was related to this huge study and one part of it was they ended up building this, another part was they ended up building an amusement park for birds outside after studying birds and looking to see what birds wanted and needed. And again, you can see how some of this stuff would take time. It takes months for them to do. And something like this, they wouldn't just build it, they would draw plans. They would look at the plans together, decide what plans to use, how to change them. So you can see how this learning is a lot more complex. Examples of documentation. To the left is some documentation. That was actually at a school in Chicago where children had their images. Again, this idea of using 3 languages. Let's see if I can point out here. At the top here, there's a photograph of the child's drawing, then a piece, and then the drawing or the image made in clay, etched in clay. So this idea of using 3 different languages helps you to know what the children is trying to express a little bit better. And then these are some of their images of their favorite thing to play with at school, made out of clay. To the right, that is a studio in Reggio Emilia. They were working on a project with people, and these are some of the people that they made in this project. Again, they weren't just making this one day, this was all embedded within a large project. Another example, this is very simple, again, the language of gesture. Children making hand gestures, and then it's hard to see, but then they drew the gestures, and then they have their words about the gestures too. So when I said earlier too, when they focus on communication, what happens in terms of like reading and writing and literacy, all that stuff is embedded in this work, and math and science. But it's embedded in a way where they would never do like things like worksheets, because they're actually working on whatever the focus area is that they're working on. So some final guiding principles. The child is the protagonist or leader of his or her learning. All children are born ready to learn about the world, wanting to explore, experience, and socialize with others. Play allows the natural and complex learning process in humans to occur. Creativity is seen as a key to development and learning. Learning occurs through experiences, communication, and relationships. The visual arts help children grapple with complex ideas as they use metaphor and imagery to construct understanding. You know, the thing too is sometimes we'll have children, instead of telling us what they think, to draw what they think. And things will come out in drawings that won't come out in the conversation or the dialogue. And that's true of adults too. So that's why it's important to use kind of different languages. The child, the teacher, and the parents are all learners. Teachers are researchers as strategies and processes for learning are studied and pursued. And I just wanted to show you kind of a little bit of the timeline of their history. So they started their school system right after World War II. Then in the 60s, they began to develop this particular philosophy called the Reggio Emilia approach. In the 70s, they began to have infant centers, because originally it was just preschool. In the 80s, they began to have exhibits, and they have exhibits that are just astounding that travel throughout the world. There's one traveling in the United States right now. It just left Boston, and it's going to be in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't know, man, that's a hard time of the year to go visiting Madison. But, and it was in Chicago in 2010. And when the exhibits come, they find a place and it stays for about 6 months. And then they have professional development activities during those 6 months. And at least once in those 6 months, they have somebody from Italy come over and do a series of doing a seminar, like a 3-day seminar. And then from the 90s until now, they developed Malaguzzi Center. They purchased like 3 old cheese factories, 3 buildings together, and they have exhibits in it. And this is where, when they have these study tours where people come and they do presentations, But they also built in one of the buildings an elementary school, because this philosophy is not used in elementary school. When their kids are 6 and they go on to first grade, they go into a traditional kind of state school, which is like a public school system, and they don't use this philosophy. So what the city of Reggio did is they worked with Rome, who is, where the school, the administrators in Rome, to experiment and start an elementary school that's using Reggio Emilia philosophy. And I think it's been in existence for at least like 5 years now. So they have that one school. And then also the other thing they do is they have some contracts with the public schools where some of their educators, some of their pedagogistas, which is another position that they have there, it's like an education coordinator or education director. They have some of their pedagogistas work with some of the school age programs and do projects with the children. So they're trying to become more engaged with the elementary school system. And I think, these are just examples of schools in the United States. There are many schools now. This is a little older. There are many schools beyond this that are exploring the approach. One thing is the North American Reggio Emilia Alliance, NARIA. You can go on their website and try to look at things. There's also, if you just Google Reggio Children, that's an organization that works with the philosophy in the schools. And it has lots of information if you were interested. On that note, I want to just show you one other thing before we can open it up to questions. But this is, if I can get this to work. This is a student of mine a few years ago who, for the class, they had to choose a philosophy. There were 4 different philosophies in terms of early childhood education, and they had to make a little presentation. And it was a really hard class because they were acting like not very interested. I don't know how else to say it. It was history and philosophy of education. Sometimes it's hard to get people interested in that. And I thought, God, this is really hard. Nobody's interested in this, and they're not paying attention to any of this. And I really thought it was going badly. And then, like when they did their presentations at the end, a small group did this presentation. So I thought I'd just share it with you. If I can get it to work, it would look like we're all set.
If I had to sum up Reggio, I would say that it's all about connections. The connection to the community. The connections that allow relationships to form. The connections that are processed by our senses when exploring with materials. And the way all these intertwined connections inspire to create meaning and cognitive enlightenment.
In Reggio, they don't lock their view on children or the learning process. The world and its people are always changing, and that's why they don't have set programs and methods. In Reggio Emilia, they have a coined expression: a child has 100 languages. They try to unite and develop all these languages through fantasy, art, music, dance, building, writing, talking, and singing. Children build knowledge and meaning through their environment.
Reggio educators do not see children as blank pages needing to be filled. They see children as full of potential, competent, and capable of building their own theories. In Reggio, children must have control over the direction of their learning. They must be able to learn through experiences of touching, moving, listening, seeing, and hearing. Children must have endless ways and opportunities to express themselves.
questions or comments do you guys have about this approach? Or what are your thoughts about it?
So what was the, I agree all of that is wonderful. What was the point where someone made the decision that this is a really good philosophy? You know, you don't have quantitative scales. So what was the qualitative moment when someone said, this is great coming from this town and we want to...
Be great, you mean after they already developed
Yeah,
it?
what was like a proof point that it is a good philosophy?
Well, I think, yeah, that's a question people ask. That question and what happens to these kids when they go on to the system. Those are common questions. You know, for them, they look at what's going on in their community and they have no illiteracy, okay? And all these children go on and lead successful careers. A lot of them come back as adults and talk about their experiences when they went to the school. They come back and talk about it. So it's almost like this saying, well, they're not having, you know, these serious problems, you know, so why rock the boat kind of thing in that sense. But they are looking they are constantly kind of looking at what they're doing and always adapting. Now, when I went to Reggio Emilia in like the first time in '91, it was all a homogeneous community. Now when you go, it's totally mixed. 1 out of 5 are immigrants, okay? They're from Africa or the Slavic countries. So, I mean, as a result, one of the things that they've been focusing in on is culture and studying culture. So they try to study kind of what they're living with in terms of, and adapt in terms of that. Because they have to adapt. I mean, when you have all these children with different languages, how do you deal with that kind of thing? So they do have to deal with their reality in terms of what happens. And when you look at the approach, I mean, they haven't had somebody come in and do kind of hardcore research like we Americans do, although they have had a researcher from Chicago, I'm blanking out on his name though, who's been doing a lot of research and is, again, showing the advantages of quality childcare in terms of what happens to children in terms of the rest of their lives.
Howard Gardner, who I don't know if you know what Howard Gardner is. He's an educator who a lot of people know about from his work on multiple intelligences, and he is a professor at Harvard University. And about 20 years ago, he really became interested in the Reggio Emilia approach and brought a bunch of researchers to Italy to study this approach, and now they actually have a program at Harvard called Visible Learners. What? Project Zero. Well, they have Project Zero, but through Project Zero, one of their initial initiatives is the Visible Learners, so that they are really trying to bring this back from early childhood into the elementary school years, because we know children learn all different ways, and they have different strengths, and this is really strength-based education. One of the more traditional philosophy in education, a way of planning, is that you think with the end in mind, and then you say, okay, this is the outcome I want for these children, so I'm going to plan all these experiences to connect the dots to get them there. Then I'm going to assess them all the way along the way so that I know that they got that. This is very different because it opens the ceiling. We know that children are capable, and when they're engaged and motivated, not only are they going to get here, but they may go in totally different directions. And we're valuing that they have these multiple ways of learning and thinking and doing, and we're taking that and letting them go with it. So this planning and this approach is allowing us to help these children be who they are and get to know them. So it's like this individualized attention and knowing what their needs and interests are so that we can plan the resources and the materials in the environment to help stimulate them, but then also to constantly be monitoring that and working with them. And it's not that we as the adults are controlling their learning, we're sharing in it. So we're along for the journey, and then we're researching together. It's like when your child asks you, and why does this, and why does that? And you say, I don't know, let's find out together. So that's what this approach is really about.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the other question, because it seems to me that as you get into higher education, right, that you are assessed differently, right? You're point to point to point, and then you also. So I was wondering if there's been any studies done or any information that's been done that show the comparison between children who were in Reggio Emilia and more traditional schooling, and then how they do when they're faced with that assessment, the outcomes of assessments.
I don't know. I've heard that they're doing longitudinal studies to see how those children are doing. I don't know if they do something comparing to the others. I just don't know whether they would do something like that or not, but they want to look at how the children are doing. Experientially, those children they talk about them doing fine, because they follow up on them, just talking with them, connecting with them, but in doing kind of hard, firm research. I think they're working on it right now. What they do say is when those children go into the public school system, they do fine, because they know how to collaborate, they know how to negotiate, they know how to problem solve. In some ways, they come with more skills than maybe other children have been exposed to in terms of doing, engaging in school. Another aspect of this whole approach too is they're not just wanting children to be good scientists or good readers, they're wanting them to be productive citizens. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And the other thing is that they also want this idea of multiple perspectives. In some ways, this approach was a reaction to World War II and going against a fascist government, where there was just one opinion and everyone was supposed to follow that way. And they wanted to see a variety of opinions and perspectives. Yeah.
Going to what Sherry was saying a few minutes ago, what would you say are the two most important things that we can do in the house, at home, to continue the Reggio-inspired theme?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I guess a couple of things I think of is I'm hoping at some point too that a lot of these studies I talked about, families or parents are invited and engaged to be in them. It might be, what's your favorite book? You ask children what their favorite book is, and they may make a drawing of it. Well, you may ask the child to go home and ask everybody in the family what their favorite book is, and then bring it back and share it to school. So some kind of way to be involved with these studies in terms of being responsive, and it's different than helping them with homework. It's being engaged and relating with the whole process. So that I think is one way. And then also, I don't know, maybe sometimes just trying to notice what your kids are interested in and how can you support it. I know there was a group of parents that we worked with in Chicago where the children were studying homes and architecture. Lots of interesting buildings in Chicago and even in neighborhoods. And so they were studying houses, and they were given the challenge of, could you build your dream house, your favorite house? And they drew a plan. And then the parents were asked to come in a meeting, and they had supplies and materials. And the parents were asked to help their children build their dream house, with the parents not kind of taking over and deciding what they wanted, but supporting what their child was trying to do. And they had these amazing houses. So what are the ways you can kind of support them in what they're trying to pursue and what they're interested in? And then connecting if there are studies.
Sure.
And then kind of to add to that, I think Sherry might say that this whole idea of recognizing how capable they are and letting that trickle into the home. Like I have a friend with a 5-year-old, and she said to me, she's starting to do this, this, and this. I think next year she'll be ready for chores. Meanwhile, I have a friend with a 3-year-old, and her kid does chores around the house all the time and earns pennies for them. But she just recognized earlier how capable her daughter was of emptying a dishwasher or literally folding her own t-shirts at 3 years old. So.
Yeah, that idea of recognizing, because I think too when you meet with teachers and stuff, you're always worried about if your child's up to par, or think what are they weak in and what do I need to help them with. But pay attention to what they're really good at. I remember a teacher, Vivian Paley, who's written many books in terms of working with children. She said her whole role in a parent conference, when she meets with parents, is to let them know what the gifts of their children are, what gifts their children have, and that's her whole focus. So it wasn't to say all the things that they can't do, but to talk about kind of the amazing things they can do. So to think about it in that way too. Yeah.
I always get asked if it's Montessori, and I would say no, not exactly. So what's the biggest difference between Montessori and what we're doing here?
Because a lot of people think they're saying because they both come from Italy. But yeah, Montessori is very different in a couple of ways. One is that Montessori focuses on the individual. In Reggio Emilia, they really focus on relationships in the group. That's a very different thing. And it's the individual. You have to think about when that time was when she was working with poor children in Rome or children who had special needs in Rome. It was about being independent and being able to do something all by yourself. So she has these exact steps on how you might go about sweeping the floor or how you might go about building something. There's an exact way that you were to do something. And for that time, that was probably good. A lot of people have adapted Montessori, and changed it. But true Montessori did not believe in any imaginative play. No pretend play. Everything was about reality and doing stuff individually. Now, that you can run into programs that have changed that and adapted that now. Some stick with the true Montessori and some don't. But, and it was not seen as something where you pretended, where you thought about the group. It's just very different. I remember observing in a Montessori classroom a long time ago and watching a child with a paring knife for like 15 minutes cut an apple up into little pieces and then just sit and eat the apples afterwards. And he accomplished, his goal. But so it's a different way of kind of looking at learning.
Yeah, I know because they're asking my daughter over the holidays how she likes school. And she said, oh, she loves it. They said, what do you do? She says, I play. And kinds of really weird looks. And then they say, well, so it's Montessori. And I'm like, well, no, not really. And then they said, Ashley, what do you do? She's like, I play all day. And I'm like, yes, she plays. And they're like, and how's that teach her anything? And I'm like, because she's playing.
Because that's her job right now.
Right. But I was getting the weirdest look. So
yeah, play is really, it's been diminished in a lot of schools. But now people are starting to talk about, play is really the important stage of life, because where children kind of get their foundation for learning. So it's really important.
To swing in a different direction, how do you feel about augmenting Reggio with something like Kumon? Like a specific service provided to help children with math and science. Something very structured, very worksheet oriented. How does that fit in?
Well, I think over here it's this game of trying to see how you adapt it into your situation. You know what I mean? In Reggio, it wouldn't fit in at all, Reggio Emilia. But here, we've got a different situation. I think sometimes what you might have to do is children have to have something structured, but they better have something where they are pursuing their interests too at the same time.
I think where it's coming from is that if there's parents not trusting what's happening during the play. So when we say we're playing, what are the kind of experiences that they're having in the classroom that are fostering math and science and early literacy skills, so that they might be supplementing to go to that program, which is memorization, rote memorization, because they don't know exactly what's going on during the play.
Well, and that's why sometimes though too, when people just say play, that's why the documentation becomes really important too, because when teachers get really good at this, they can document all the aspects of kind of learning that's going on and show parents, administrators, whoever, what is going on in the process. Because there is, in all this play, there is math learning, there is science learning, there is language and literacy learning, but there's also social learning, there's also physical, there's all kinds of learning going on. And the thing about young children is they don't just go play math. Do you know what I mean? They play and math is integrated into it. Language is integrated into it. And that's why some people, when they try, with young children, they try to create like a language area, a math area. language and math is happening in all these play areas. It can be happening in blocks, it can be happening in art. There's a lot of science in art. I mean, it can be happening in all these areas and evolving. It's just the problem is we've got to kind of show how it is happening.
Sure.
You know, and that documentation is what helps show that.
Right. I mean, I would say that the collaborative, project-based, methodology is what's most critical. I mean, I know where I work, the ability to work with different kinds of people to solve complex problems, that's really the biggest skill of all, to communicate and fix something that's complicated. And I think that, without being an expert in any of this, I think that what's being done here is exactly setting them up for that.
And what I was just talking with some other educators, and they were talking about students at the college level. Some of them, because now we're getting at the college level, all the children who were in the No Child Left Behind programs, the curriculum approaches, and a lot of them, they don't have ideas. They don't know how to problem solve. They're just used to kind of following whatever they're supposed to follow, and that's not real good. So you really want to have something that is more project-based, and while they're doing these studies, they are learning to collaborate, to problem solve, to negotiate, while they're still learning the content areas, science, math, all those too. And that's why this is such fun stuff, but it's very complex.
Do you see there's any benefit to having the standardized curriculum this early on so they can adapt later in the school? So if a lower elementary school kids are expected to do the basic curriculum that we have here in the United States, is it beneficial to have them start that younger, or is this approach they transition fine into elementary school?
I think they transition fine. I think it's not good to do the standardized curriculum at the really younger ages, because they're missing out on a lot.
Right. And they adapt fine when they have to conform to
Yeah, because they're getting a lot of extra skills.
Right.
Yeah.
And they are having math and science and literacy exposure, and they do investigate symbols and have that exposure in their classroom. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the kind of provocations, when they go to the library and see how people are using language and all that.
I mean, sometimes they'll do things like study letters. Where do you see letters in the environment? Why do you think people are using letters? Instead of just saying letters, they investigate letters. That's going to have a lot more meaning and connect with them than just memorizing letters. Because actually our learning needs to be a lot deeper than just memorizing something.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate your presentation. I belong to a community called C Educators, which is secular, eclectic academics. It's a homeschooling community, and it's about 32,000 people that are in there. And I would say that it's not called this approach, but they're incorporating all this all the way through until high school, and they're doing phenomenal on ACTs, phenomenal on SATs.
Wow.
And they're thinkers. They're bringing new ideas, and there are studies that show that some countries, like say Thailand, that's exploding with all of these great grades. They come in, but when they get to college, they can reproduce what they see, but they can't incorporate anything new. They're not bringing any new innovations. And so, for me as a parent, I'm really interested in my child kind of coming into a world with their ideas that they're building on something or they're creating something new. So I think that this could absolutely, maybe not completely through, but incorporate these ideas into all the way through.
I'd like to respond because, 1991 was my first year of teaching, and I was at a small progressive school and had been exposed to the Reggio Emilia School, which was in U.S. News, the #1 school early childhood program, and everybody wanted to know what was going on, what was so special. And because I was in a progressive school that was all founded on the principles, philosophy of John Dewey, I was very interested, and my background's in the arts, so of course that speaks to me because I understand that the arts are the 100 languages of children and beyond. So important. So that's always, the philosophy has always spoken to me.
as I was a teacher in a small American school, but understanding there are aspects that cross over, right, in project-based learning. So a lot of what we want, and in our lower school, we've been focused on project-based learning for at least 10 years, almost 10 years. The focus, student-centered, differentiated instruction, being able to have children pursue their interests. So I think using the arts, being creative, there's so many different areas that we share with the Reggio Emilia. The Reggio Emilia is a much more of an emergent curriculum, right? And so I think it's amazing to watch how it can grow in the early childhood program and then into our lower school. And the kids, the way you've all said, being able to work with one another, to problem solve, the communication, so many of those aspects is why we do what we do. And as you mentioned, I mean, it's not a political, but democratic school of philosophy. It's about people coming together, constructing knowledge together based on experiences, multiple perspectives. So those are all things that we value. And as it moves up through our school at Shorecrest, we've been calling it progressive education, but those are some tenets of progressive education. So I just wanted to share that because so much of the work and the examples you have are with very young children. And as we borrow and take ideas like the documentation and how can we study and then really build on children's interests, because that's what we want to do when we say we're student driven. How do we do that? And then everything else as well, which, the reading, the writing, the math. A lot of our projects are we focus our talks with science and social studies. It's different, but there's so much that we value from the Reggio Emilia and I think can grow in the work that we do.
And a lot of times it's hard, we don't see it as much in elementary schools, it's hard to get principals and administrators to buy into it. They're so used to kind of buying curriculum that this notion is really strange to them. So you guys are lucky to have administrators that support this work, because not all of them do.
But isn't the problem also too that the reason why you're having a hard time getting the buy-in is they can't figure out how to mesh that with everything they're held accountable to, SAT scores, literacy, and all that kind of stuff. And so either they're too busy or don't have the funding to actually figure out, sit down, and even hire the people that can make that happen to mesh that and all together.
But you're not even going to make an attempt to try to explore that if you don't believe in it. You know what I mean? So you have to have some kind of buy-in, and then if you can get a group of administrators and teachers to work on it together, because I know there are huge challenges in terms of the requirements and stuff like that. A lot of teachers, what they do in elementary schools is just on their own, they'll try to do a strand or a bit of Reggio, knowing that they don't have support, so they'll just try to do it themselves in the classroom. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on how this is implemented at Shorecrest? Meaning, is this the sole basis of the preschool learning and then how it transitions into kindergarten and lower school? I know you did a little bit about that in the introduction, but I'd appreciate a little more information on that.
Okay. So in Alpha and Junior Kindergarten, each class has an interest area that by looking and listening to the children, they notice. So for example, one group in Alpha now is studying rainbows. And so they're studying light and prisms and colors, and their books are about that, and a lot of their songs are about that, and they're going out and doing science experiments. So they're using that theme, as you would say, that investigation of rainbows to help guide the kids through the learning process. And also it's co-construct knowledge and challenge what they think and where they're going together. And an example of a study that one of the junior kindergarten classes is doing is on cities, and they're going in small groups downtown on field experiences. Parents are part of that process. They're building things, they're making plans, but that's guiding that interest for this group. But this is allowing each class to go a different direction. But when the teachers still plan together, they're still, even when you're in Alpha, you have a similar experience in Alpha, but each classroom has its own personality. And then they do some things together, like the explorations that they have as a grade level. Same thing in junior kindergarten. But all those foundational, it's really about the habits of mind and like the skills and the content. They're getting that, but they're getting that through play-based and play and hands-on experiences. So it's really that the teachers are constantly reflecting together about what their kids are doing and saying and thinking about their needs, and then planning on what kind of provocations, like what things are they going to set up in the classroom. When they plan together, they think, what do I need to put out so that the kids may do this with it? But it's open-ended, so they may also do other things, and then when you notice what they're doing or what they're not doing, then you may add something else or extend it in a different way. So we're constantly trying to think of how to further challenge them or how to support them through materials and experiences inside and outside. So like on the playground, they may notice like kids are really interested in tires. Okay, so they may be building up the tires, and then they say, well, what if we put wooden planks out there? And then all of a sudden the kids are building, balance beams with the tires and the planks. And then maybe someone took a plank on a tire and made a seesaw, and then they're studying that. And then we might say, oh, we might put some other objects out there to see what they do with it. And then all of a sudden they may be going into catapults. So it's kind of open-ended, but it's because you're noticing what the kids are interested in that you're adding other degrees of challenges. And all along the way, the kids are talking, the teacher's in there listening, but it's not just that we're sitting back, we're asking questions.
And to add to that, it might be too, when they build something, let's say with the tires, then ask them to draw and make a replica. So somebody could come the next day and make the same thing. So asking them to repeat what they did, or if you gave directions on how to make that. So you're always, you're adding additional challenges, or even like studying the city. You have to think, it's not just what are the preconceived ideas that we want them to learn. Let's see where this goes, but let's ask some questions like, what are the sounds of the city? What are the smells of the city? Where does the city begin and where does the city end? How do you know you're in the city? How do you know you're outside the city? Asking those kind of questions to kind of provoke children to think further, instead of thinking, oh, I want them to know this, this, and this about the city. It's a different way of approaching it.
Yeah, and then and what Karen was saying too, and you take pictures of them on those experiences so that when you come back, you talk about it, you reflect about it, and what other questions might we have? And so you say you met like an architect of that building, the kids might write a list of questions for the architect, and then we might have the architect come in and the kids can ask those questions of that person. Like, Mrs. Plattner is an axolotl expert. We have an axolotl in junior kindergarten. A lot of classes don't have pets anymore, but we have abundant, interesting
What's an
pets.
axolotl?
So there you go. She was our guest expert on axolotls.
It took me about a minute to get it with an animal, but I did get that far.
But then she came in and she put it out on the table. Like, she taught kids about it, they read the book about it, she put it on the table, the kids touched it. Now she brought us another axolotl. But that's why we're called the experiential school. The kids have a lot of experiences that are not traditional experiences, but yet they're all about thinking and doing and us hearing and building. So it's like we're building those foundational skills. It's just not in a traditional approach to doing it. And then these kids, though, they love coming to school because they're playing and they feel like I have a place here, this is my community, I have friends, I'm not just in my classroom, I go to all the classrooms. So my class is learning about axolotls, you learned about cities. When I come into your classroom, that's my classroom too, because we go and explore through all those things. And those teachers, all 6 of the teachers, actually in junior kindergarten it's 8. But all 8 of those teaching teams, they plan together, and those kids travel around and do things together. So I'm learning from you. You're the child that is in that classroom becomes an expert to their friend that's in the other class, and they share. So it's like that communication, that I have something valuable to share, is very empowering. And then, so they have these 2 years now for junior kindergarten, and then they come to kindergarten.
I'm just aware of the time right now.
Oh, sorry.
I can talk more. I want to say one other thing that I didn't mention, and that is that you mentioned, the importance of revisiting. That when this documentation, sometimes we go back and read what children said or where they look at the picture. And when you get to revisit something, you make meaning. That's the time you make sense of it. And I think it's really sad in education, we don't revisit what children say or do very much. And that's the time where you really make sense of something. So revisiting and looking at documentation for the children becomes very important in terms of the learning process.
Let's just quickly, I'll just say, we're in the learning process, right? That we've been doing project approach. It's very similar but different. And so there are aspects that we are learning. So I think there's a smooth transition. Project approach is very similar. It's inquiry-based learning. And as you go through the lower school. And the teachers in first and kindergarten are learning this process to be able to borrow from and to also understand where kids are coming from as they're coming from Alpha and JK.
You really need to know how it happens and to be able to see it. We want you to. So I know that I'm very excited and passionate about it, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here with us and ask Karen the questions and learn more.
Thank you.